During the 1930s and 1940s, Middlesbrough had a fearsome reputation, and in those days, the toughest guy around by far was Jimmy Swales. He was the sort of guy that the toughs took one look at and decided it might be best to change pubs or just go home. Before Jimmy, there was another top dog, Quiet Henry Wilson. Henry would solve a dispute with one punch, and then go back to his pint as if nothing had happened. Today we take a look at a guy that some would argue is the most legendary of all Middlesbrough's hard men. Stay tuned as we look at the life and times of Lee Duffy. Lee Duffy was, some would argue, the hardest man in Middlesbrough during the 1980s and early 1990s, and he was feared by many. He had been bullied as a kid, and later found himself in the same youth offenders unit as one of the bullies. During this time in the unit, he beat up and tormented the bully without mercy. Many knew Duffy because he was a well-known doorman, famous for fights he had with drunks and other doormen alike. Others knew Duffy as a bare-knuckle fighter, and knew of his immense dislike for fellow hardman and street-fighting legend Paul Sykes. Certain groups of people, especially the police, knew Duffy because of his drug-dealing activities, which involved taxing and relieving drug dealers of their ill-gotten gains, acts which would lead to him being targeted by underworld hitmen as a consequence. Lee cut a formidable figure, tall at 6'3" and weighing 17 stone, all muscle. He would infamously become part of a team known as the Taxmen when he joined forces with another notorious gangland figure. Lee had been trying to fight criminal Brian Cockerell for some time, in order to prove once and for all who was the hardest man on Teesside. In an unexpected twist, the two men saw similarities in each other, and they became a formidable combined force, taking thousands of pounds worth of drugs, money, and cars from drug dealers. But he was a marked man living on borrowed time. Lee Duffy is said to have survived 3 alleged attempts on his life before he was killed in a street stabbing in August of 1991. The ex-boxer and bouncer was shot on 2 separate occasions, and once had petrol poured over him, with threats made to turn him into a human torch. But in August of 1991, Duffy's life came to a violent end when he was stabbed during a brutal street brawl on Martin Road in Middlesbrough. He was only 26 when he died, so why has his short life generated several books as well as a documentary? It was at the hands of a man whom he once called a friend that Lee Duffy lost his life. David Allison and Duffy had exchanged words at a blues party in the Afro-Caribbean Centre. Witnesses said Duffy had poisoned the atmosphere at the event by ordering everyone out of his way throughout the night, and just behaving like a general menace. The two men walked out to the car park, where a huge crowd gathered to watch Allison and bare-chested amateur boxer Duffy have a scrap, one that would ultimately end in tragedy. This fight was dirty. Initially, Duffy was getting the better of Allison, who was having his head banged into the ground. Onlookers said Allison, who was armed with a knuckle duster, was being beaten by Duffy fair and square, and the notorious hardman was doing quite a bit of damage. Then, in a deadly twist, a friend of Allison's passed him a knife, which he plunged into Duffy's side, underneath his left arm. The 26-year-old collapsed in the middle of the road, calling onlookers for help. He was rushed to Middlesbrough's General Hospital, and emergency medics battled to stop blood pouring from the wound. But despite their efforts, Lee Duffy died at 3:55 a.m. on August 25th of 1991. News of his death spread quickly around the northeast. One of the most feared men on Teesside had lost his life in a street fight, the type of fight that he'd survived countless times before. Some thought the killer's identity would be the best kept secret, with no witnesses coming forward initially, despite reporting that many people were present watching the fight. But the day after his death, Allison phoned his father and uttered the chilling words, "I think I've killed Lee Duffy." He did the right thing and handed himself in to the police, where he was arrested and later charged with Lee Duffy's murder. In February of 1993, Allison went on trial at Teesside Crown Court. He told the jury he feared for his life when Duffy picked the fatal fight with him, knowing the notorious thug regularly carried a gun. The court heard movie-like tales of Duffy's violent ways, with details of his gun-toting exploits. Supposedly, Duffy had played Russian roulette with a loaded revolver, declaring himself invincible. At the end of the trial, cheers erupted from the public gallery, and Allison smiled, as the jury found him not guilty of both murder and manslaughter, ruling that he acted in self-defense. Outside of the court, Duffy's mother said, "It's not a true verdict. There is only one good thing that has come out of this. Lee would not have wanted him to go to jail, because Lee was not a man who wanted anyone to go to jail. Lee could have accepted it, but it is different for me." Hundreds of people lined the streets for Lee Duffy's funeral in September of 1991, and 2 trucks were needed just to carry the floral tributes. As we have seen many times before, when key organised crime figures die, a vacuum is created. Following Duffy's death, characters from Middlesbrough's seedy underworld vied for the top criminal spot left by Duffy. Around half a dozen men looked to muscle in and fill the shoes of the most feared hard man. Many people, including the police, believed there would be who led the hunt for Duffy's killer said at the time, "There won't be another bloke like Duffy, he was a one-off." The story of Teesside's most controversial and feared figure has been documented in books and a short film over the years, and in 2020, director Paul Saget released Lee Duffy, Too Far Too Soon, a documentary which chronicles his life. Author Jamie Boyle, whose 2 Lee Duffy books became bestsellers, is one of the many to be involved and interviewed for the documentary. Another book, called Operation Sayers, explores Duffy's friendship with Tyneside gangster Stephen Sayers. The chapter on Lee, named The Duffer, documents the close friendship Lee Duffy had with Stephen Sayers after they first met as youngsters in Low Newton Remand Centre in 1982. Packed with more stories of Lee Duffy's exploits, the book references him throughout and details incidents of him taking on 3 doormen at a time and beating them to a pulp. The book is also notable for containing never-before-seen images of Duffy. All we have left of Lee Duffy is memories. During his short life, he gained notoriety for solving problems with his fists. Some people remember him being a cruel, heartless and mean person, always looking for trouble and aiming to be the most feared gangster on Teesside. Other people remember him as being a good-hearted family man, an amateur boxer and doorman and minor local celebrity. What we do know is that a lot of people who really knew him are now dead. The memory of Lee Duffy has to be pieced together from the story